This is the Tobor 535 podcast. I'm Tayden.
I'm Ethan.
I'm Evie.
I'm Gwen.
I'm Luca.
I'm Ian.
And I'm Emily.
When we started out, we all got together and started, we just started thinking of ideas and throwing them all out there so that we could have as many aspects and angles of how the game would work and how we would want to tackle the challenge of moving the game elements and moving our robot.
So during our initial brainstorming session, we also came up with our 5 primary design priorities, what we really wanted to accomplish this season, so that we could decide what we were going to prioritize prototyping, designing, and building first. So our 5 main scoring priorities this year were autonomous, which I was very happy about because I'm a programmer. Moving the foundation, collecting stones, parking under the sky bridge, and having the robot be short enough that we could move under the sky bridge, the 14-inch sky bridge.
When we started prototyping the parts that we had brainstormed, we used things like cardboard and just like basic components that we could get easily that we already had, and just putting up these mock-ups to really just look like what we wanted the idea to be, or have some sort of basic function that would replicate what we wanted on the final robot. And once we had those things prototyped, we then went to 3D model them so that we could get the big picture of our entire robot before going in and just making the parts. Because when you have the big picture, you can then you know how things have to be and like what holes you're gonna have to make, instead of just eyeballing the measurements or just like just kind of lining things up really sloppily. We can give the build team precise measurements on where the holes need to be, what sizes they are, where things need to be bent, and stuff like that.
So for CADing this year, we had a set design criteria based off of our top 5 scoring criteria. The basic ones were, we wanted mechanism wheels to give us extra maneuverability. We wanted to be able to reach up at least 12 blocks high. So by the end of the year, we had a robot that could reasonably, with a decent alliance partner, actually make a tower that high. And third, we wanted to be able to move the foundation easily without too much hassle of trying to figure out, all right, do we need to push it, pull it, or anything like that. And that was it. Which gave us a lot of room to CAD it. And there's also a bunch of little nuances with like exactly how you want to mount the wheels and everything like that. But if I went through with all that, we'd be here for another 2 hours.
When you're CADing your robot out, it's always good to, like, you want to try to have the robot 3D modeled before you start building. And there's some things that you can start building, like if you've got the chassis already modeled in CAD, you can start doing that. But while you're CADing, it's important that you take note of what parts you might not have yet, and to be able to make a list of those and get them purchased and ordered pretty early, because you don't want to have a competition coming up and you don't have a critical part you need, and you're like playing a waiting game on whether or not you can get your robot finished.
A lot of very popular parts end up on back order early in the season because every other team is also ordering their parts.
This year we have a lot of custom fabrication. We have a lot of machinery to do so. We have a water jet cutter, which has been very helpful when creating parts that would otherwise be very difficult to make by hand with a bandsaw. And then we would take those parts, and some of them we may need to bend. So we also have a press brake, which makes it a lot easier to make different designs, and we're not as limited to different parts we can use. This year we have a lot. We our entire chassis frame is been custom made. The rails for water jet cut, and we made the top plate by hand with the bandsaw and drill press. So
Something I'd like to mention is though that kind of machinery is very expensive and we're lucky to have it. If you do not have this machinery, it would be a good idea if you need these parts done to contact sponsors in your area or people that might have the machinery because a lot of times you can get parts sent off to them to fabricate for you, which we have done, which we had to do until the past couple of years.
We have an excellent sponsor in our town, Tom Klepfer, who owns a business called TK Fabricating, and he's been very helpful in past years, helping us make custom parts that we didn't have the capacity to ourselves.
So this year we've been trying to maintain a build log of our robot, making sure to keep track of everything we do and who's done it. So in case like somebody goes in and they've been gone for a little while, they can go and check up on the build log and know exactly what's been done to the robot and who's done it, so they can ask them if they have any issues. We are updated with our build log, although it only got started like halfway through our chassis.
But it's always better to start the build log like better late than never, because it's just good to have a record of what you've been doing, and it's a lot easier to remember what you've done if you write it down as you're doing it rather than trying to look back like 4 weeks ago and remember specifically what you did on that day. Another part of your robot build that's really important is that you like do things right the first time, measure things out carefully, and just don't do anything that means you have to go back and redo it, because if you cut corners on something and just to save time, you may end up doing it wrong, and then you'll have to go back and redo it and end up spending 3 times the amount of time that you would have spent on that part if you had done it correctly in the first place. That's why you 3D model, so that you have the exact measurements and everything that you need. That way you don't have to like do any guesswork when you're building.
Yeah, so be sure you're not just eyeballing things, measure them with calipers, use a center punch to line up your holes, make sure you're using the right size drill bits, and any number of other things.
Yeah, this will not only save time, but it'll save materials that can be expensive, especially if you keep doing things wrong and have to use a bunch of them.
especially with us having our water jet cutter, the garnet is very expensive to use. So as we need to make sure that we are doing it correctly, because we can't afford to remake parts with the water jet cutter.
Right.
So another important aspect of the build and design season is the engineering notebook. So as Gwen mentioned earlier, we do document the build portion of our season in a build log, but it's important to also make sure that the judges have a more finalized understanding of what your robot actually does. So that can be documented in your engineering notebook through a design section. So what we do is we document every single prototype that we create and list its pros and its cons, and then write up a page on every single sub component of our robot, like our chassis, our manipulator, that kind of thing, so that the judges, if they have questions on how exactly our design was made, they can reference those pages in the notebook.
And that is very important for the design award, the innovate award, and of course the thick award.
So while me and Luca were walking out of school yesterday, we were talking about how the robot looks like a dinosaur, and we thought about maybe if we make it to what?
Is this for the podcast, or are you just saying?
I'm just saying.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Put in the podcast.
Yeah, I'll put it in the podcast.
I can. Yeah.
But we thought about making our robot look like the
They're called
Well,
banthas.
Banthas.
No, they're not called banthas. The things on
The
top.
like the ice
Tauntaun?
thingies.
Yeah, with the horns.
Tauntauns.
Tauntauns?
Tauntauns.
Yeah.
Tauntauns.
Tauntaun or a wampa?
Making it look
Tauntauns.
like a tauntaun, like
Tauntauns are
It's a
furry.
drone.
but like just like putting like paws on the arms,
Banthas
and
are-
then like having the like
Horns.
extending head, like have the horns and
That would
stuff
slap.
like that.
That
That would
would
be
slap.
really
I don't
cool.
I
They
think that
have
the banthas are the giant like woolly mammoth things.
I'm already on it.
Okay.
I don't think Tauntauns had horns.
Yeah, they do.
They
Oh,
do.
Yeah, they do. You're right.
Thank you for listening to the Spare Parts Podcast. Make sure to watch the other episodes or listen, I guess. And yeah, we'll see you next time.